price is what you pay, value is what you get. And for us, I learned as much after we started developing products in terms of the functional benefits that there were opportunities to improve on with the product development firm, because they bring a lens that's an engineering lens and that's a very neutral lens. And they just go do almost third-party market research. And we landed on 3 core, we call advanced benefits. One is the stand assist feature, which is a lower set of handrails and also a very stable base that comes from the re-engineering of it, rollators and walkers. From standing in the center, you have about half the footprint, which is really valuable to the tight spaces of a home or hospital. And when it folds, it stands really nicely, really easily. And that was a curveball.
Today's guest is someone who sees firsthand how the right tools can completely change a person's ability to live independently. And when he couldn't find the products his patients really needed, he decided to build them himself. Dr. Matt Cumella is a physical therapist and the founder of Nuvio, a company that's rethinking assistive mobility devices like walkers and canes to make them safer, smarter, and more effective. With over a decade of experience in post-acute care, Matt has witnessed the limitations of traditional mobility aids and has set out to create innovative solutions that don't just improve mobility, but also enhance the quality of life for their users. Today, we'll hear how Matt made the leap from clinician to entrepreneur, the challenges he faced in creating a tech-driven product in a traditionally low-tech field, and how his work is helping to shape the future of assistive mobility. It's a journey that combines thoughtful design with a passion for empowering people, and it all started with one big question. What if we could do it better? Stay with us. This is PT Pintcast. First of all, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
All right, so let's give everybody a little bit of context. Tell us the story, or where does it start? How you came up with the idea for your product, how you named it, right? And then really big picture, what problem were you trying to solve, and what inspired you to take that very first hard step?
Sure. So my product is really a next generation walker, we call it. My background is really heavy in post-acute care, mostly in skilled nursing and really heavily in CCRC, continuing care rehab centers. And I think that sort of particularly inspired me, at least when I look back, because you often follow patients. It's a CCRC, continuing care. You follow them through the continuum. And I felt like I saw walkers and everyday assistive devices in sort of all their lights, right? As a rehab tool, where, this is what the nurse's aide should get them out of bed with, as a rehab tool for me directly with my patients, and then them using it at home and kind of coming back and saying, this is how it worked or didn't. And I was inspired first and foremost by my patients, who I felt like were asking me, Matt, you got to be kidding me, 4 posts and tennis balls, like you can't, like nothing better here or when I go home, or, rollators and other devices. It just felt like there was always some sort of something off in their day to day that they couldn't do, whether it was maneuverability, stability. And then on the flip side of it, I think in those settings, particularly in inpatient settings, we have a lot of tools in our tool chest that right now are very advanced in gyms and clinics, robotic exoskeletons and partial body weight support systems that we use for the same patients that we then, when we are done with them for our hour, we unhook them from these 6-figure pieces of equipment and we hand them a $50 piece of equipment.
Right.
That is not the wheel. It's not perfect. It gets a job done. And so you would combine patients telling me, I feel like I can do more. I felt like I would see more in the clinic and I would have better tools to showcase more. And I just felt like I saw a gap. I saw a gap really. I now phrase it as a gap in everyday assistive tech. There's the institutional tech and then there's everyday assistive tech. Yeah. And there just felt like there was an opportunity there.
All right. So let's zoom in on just a couple different problems, right? Like 4 legs and a couple tennis balls. Well, I don't know, man. Maybe I'll push back, Matt. It seemed to work, but what are the frustrating parts? Like if you're going to improve the walker, what are the things about it that you're actually going to zoom in on and say, okay, let's change this because of this? So, what's 1 or 2 or 3 of those things that you're like, these things need to change?
Yeah, sure. So as a clinic, like treating as a therapist, probably my biggest one was sit to stand transfers. Hand placement and sequencing and all that jazz. When you step back from that, when people have struggle out of a chair and you really look at their mechanics the way you would look at their mechanics deadlifting in a CrossFit gym or something, and you do a fine tooth comb, you realize it's a really bad mechanical advantage to push up from what you're sitting on, right? And then the thing that you're reaching for does not want to stay stable. It wants to tip back on you. So you have this kind of, and so that's what I felt like I would see in the clinic. I would see, I mean, and we all that we treat these patients, we see, add an inch or two to their seat height and give them the right hand positioning and foot positioning, and they often, it goes a long way. It's very marginal, but then that wouldn't translate to the home. So they really wouldn't do any different. And it just felt like, okay, well, the tool was not really designed to support that moment.
Right.
It can't be a walker and help you walk if it can't get you out of the chair. It's actually the number one reason for disability and falls. So it's a huge kind of pain point in the, moving through your day functionally. That was my primary. That was what kind of got me in the garage, was really what if you had more of an all-purpose tool for the full, from I'm sitting down and I need to go do the full task that I'm about to go do, and it'll help me through all elements of that in case, I need it.
All right. So you said move to the garage, where, I mean, even the computer that I'm recording this episode on was born, right? Apple was born in a garage. We talk about bands and computer companies. Did you have any design background? You're a physical therapist by education, but any design or engineering background, or you just decided to take this thing on?
None whatsoever. I have a dad who's an engineer, but in a way that is a completely different engineering skill set than like developing a product. I did sort of the Saturday morning run to Home Depot probably for the first time 5 years ago, and it was a massive failure. And I did maybe a handful of those where I'd go and get PVC pipe, and I had some drawing where like, okay, well, what if it was designed like this? I don't know really what got me to even that point. I just kind of did it one day, and it was go back to your day job, very much so. And then around the pandemic and all things that shifted there, for whatever reason around that time, I kind of got a little bit more heavily. I think it's just kind of, it was in the back of my mind and just something pulled it forward. And what I did was I reached out to engineers and designers somewhat through friends. So typically like a mechanical engineer and an industrial designer, those are like the two skill sets that go into
Right.
product development. They kind of pair together, and that's how you get going all the way to a product. And they each were wonderful with their time. There's a handful of them that, I could be business for them. And they gave me kind of the honest truth of like, look, if you want to do this, you could hand this off to me, but this is what I'm going to do. And it's something that you could do in the garage. And really what it was a process, right? It wasn't just a go and get PVC pipe and not know what you just failed on, but it was like pay attention to what you fail on, pay attention to the little successes, and kind of, if it's going to go anywhere, it's going to start with that. And I think they kind of inspired me to maybe give it more of a shot. And probably 6 to 8 weeks of doing that on weekends, and I had a provisionally patented mock-up prototype.
That's great. What was the reason they were so nice? Did they sort of take a liking to the fact that you were trying to sort of solve a problem that, maybe they touched them personally, or like, what was the reason they were so giving?
I have found exactly that. I think often product developers, they're not necessarily developing products that can have a meaningful impact on someone's quality of life. Maybe they have a personal story related to someone with assistive needs, right?
Sure.
But that was 100%. I felt like it. I felt like they just gave me more of their time of day, because I had a helping product, which is kind of what I've told other PTs who have thought of things like you can, people want to help people, live their lives better and not take advantage of that, but it was immensely, it went a long way for me.
Yeah. Or as some great geriatric PTs that I've gotten to speak to, it's like, we're all geriatric patients in training, right? We want to get there, which is an advantage. So you're creating something that maybe you're going to need to use one day. Well, let's talk about challenges. Getting from where you started in the garage, or the idea, to where you are now, what were some of the biggest challenges you encountered in the early stages and through development of the product? And then how did you maybe overcome them? What are some of the potholes that maybe the person like me who's never done this doesn't really ever get to see?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I tried early on, and I would literally like almost ask everyone I got in touch with was, what does success look like with something like this? I really wanted to understand where I was going, and even in like an incremental way, like what's the next kind of milestone thing to the full prototype to production. And the challenges are just that there is so much that goes into something that actually hits our shelves than we could ever know. And I think our product, while it's pretty simple from a standpoint of FDA regulation, there is that extra layer, especially if you want to do it right,
Yep.
of liability, reliability, sort of quality management, the way you want to do it in the design phase, as well as then once you're on the market. A lot of that takes time and it takes money. And so, I got that provisionally patented prototype and I was like, oh man, I'm going to be on the market in 3 months. I'm going to have somebody do this for this ridiculously low dollar amount now. And I'm going to be selling these things in no time. Instead that timeline was another better prototype. That was a good proof of concept. And I was actually giving it to patients and, ooh, this is exciting. And then you realize like you either have to bootstrap your life savings away for my product, right? Because I know, others can be different. Or, okay, maybe we need to talk to investors, which is just its own, totally different. And I got very lucky early on where I got the company into, I say the company, this is still me in a garage, but I had some friends who were in the startup space and they told me about incubators and accelerators and all these things that I had no idea, but I got into one. And then that becomes its own resource. And then you meet people through that. And I met an advisor through that process who then became really a business partner, really a co-founder early on. And he knows, he really knew the way you go about this, the way you raise money from
Right.
angel investors and VCs. And to get to the next stage really required what you would call a pre-seed round. And our prototype at that point that helped us raise money really needed to be developed into a production level product from a bunch of professional product developers, not just a single one or two people. And then I learned what that process is and hooked up with a product development firm that, really this product has been developed with a dozen people having hands in it. And use that funding, get us to that point. And then that was still not a get on the market standpoint.
Right.
That was just you have a product. Do people want your product, which is its own whole process that were challenges all along the way there. And we did another round of funding that really has now taken us to market. And that's commercialization kind of seed round, you would call in that language.
Hey, where are you going with your PT career? That's not rhetorical. I want to know. Would you like to embark on an extraordinary patient care adventure? That's what they call it. Some people might call it travel therapy. Find out more at jacksontherapy.com. This is perfect for physical therapists who are eager to make their mark. Discover where your skills can take you at jacksontherapy.com with Jackson Therapy Partners. And here's a question for you. You frustrated with your EMR? Feel like it should do more, be easier? Yeah. Take the next step. Maybe try something new. How about an EMR that's all in one? Seamless integrations of patient portals, marketing automations, and billing, all at an unbeatable value. Plus, switching over is a breeze. See what you can do with MW Therapy and their all-in-one EMR at mwtherapy.com. And how would you like to boost your bottom line and help more people? You can do both of those things without having to work more. Smarter, not harder, kids. Boost your clinic's revenue by $290 per patient per quarter by adding remote therapeutic monitoring. You've heard about it, but you're like, I don't know where to get started. Is it complicated? Well, what if you knew where to get started and it wasn't complicated? That's what Physiotech is here for. Kickstart your RTM at physiotech.ca. That's physiotech.ca right now with Physiotech.
So I'm going to stop right here. Let's just make this a pit stop. Some things that I sort of noticed, and you're the 5th episode in this sort of series, and patterns just emerge, right? The products that we've been talking about are vastly different. And yet some of the things that you and the other guests have said are really, really similar. And 2 that strike out at me is, 1, not a lot of knowledge or experience or skills doing a lot of the things that you didn't know you'd need to have experience in. And the second being people, which is you filled in those gaps with people. You met people, you sought people out. A person might have led you to a solution, or a person led you to a person who led you to a person, led you to a solution. It just makes me think of that song from Sesame Street, right? Who are the people in our neighborhood? And those are the people that are actually going to get that product to market. And then it feels like that line from the movie with Matt Damon, The Martian, is like, well, we figure out this problem, and then we solve the next one, and we solve the next one until eventually you get to go home. And your home is getting to market. So you did mention another part that people might overlook, right? Just create a great product and then build a website, and then the world will beat a path to your door. It's not always that you're already shaking your head. It's not always that simple. So how did you validate the market? This is a really important step that I want people to pay attention to, because it's been sort of asterisked in every episode we've done in this series. How did you validate the market for Nuvio? What steps did you take to ensure there was a demand, so that when you got to that point, there was something waiting for you to meet you? And then how do you initially begin to market this to the people that you think it would serve the best?
Yeah, I mean, it's been the greatest overall challenge, I think. And that's the biggest part of what makes a difference between a prototype and a product. One thing I felt like I learned, and still to be determined if this is, a lesson learned, was, I think sometimes you romanticize the product you're developing. And, you maybe have something that really you're going to sell it for way more, but people are going to buy it because, that whole sort of thing,
Sure.
Because you've built it and you've really identified this need. I didn't want to make that mistake. Having said that, we still have a premium price product, right? But I didn't want to just kind of romanticize that. And that took a lot to kind of validate that market. On a market research side. So literally just sort of like, what do these things sell for? What are trends happening in the market that maybe, are prices going up or prices going down? For the ones that prices are higher, what do they have that make them better or different? What's going on in the market in general? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? And then literally you pair that with 2 other factors, I think. You pair that with the value props that you're going to put into the product, the benefits that it's going to have, and you have to validate those in a very just user-centric way.
Sure.
Who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that are going to use it? Be adjacent to the people that are going to use it and maybe have value. Maybe they have to carry it and load it as a loved one or a PT. And then the last part is literally what can you make it for and sell it for to deliver on those benefits,
Right.
And then hit into the market that you are now targeting, or the segment of the market that you're targeting. And if all of that sounds really complex, it's because it is, and it was, and it still is. And that was one of the biggest parts of the challenge. We started at a lower price point than we wound up landing on, but we also felt like we were adding benefits along the way. And the market, we have found, and I've been even surprised as a PT, that we are not the most expensive, player in the game. Sure. At a premium price point. There are products, they're really going in that direction because the aging population and those caring for them are looking for quality and function, rather than what sometimes we think of as walkers as just go on Amazon, get whatever. But there's a diminishing return to that if they're not hitting on your quality of life, or if their brakes are busting in a year because they're just not high quality.
Yeah.
So we kind of landed on a price point that's higher, but not so high. And we were able to marry that with just literally what we could produce, and the cost we could produce of that.
Yeah. I want people to envision that seesaw. And I talk about this a lot on our podcast, which is we focus a lot on the price side of that seesaw, right? Well, I could just discount it. Maybe I'll give a promo code. It's really easy and a little bit lazy to just focus on that price side. But it sounds like you and the rest of the people in this series focused on the other side of that seesaw, which is how do I overload on value so that when you look at the price side, you say, well, you've given me so much, this still feels like a steal. That doesn't mean half your cost to make it feel twice as good. You could actually just add so much value that the price never moves, but it feels like it's smaller. This is, your product, Nuvio, is something I never really needed until the last 2 years, until my parents both at some point needed something like this. I had no idea. And I had, handed people walkers as a physical therapist and used them in different settings. I had no idea what they cost, right? Someone just either brought it to me or they went out and got themselves. But then you start to see all the different places these things need to go, the things they should be able to do, but can't. And you didn't think about that. So talk about some of the specific features. What were some of the things that you said, hey, we've realized this is a problem and we could add to this? And I'll show a little graphic. I think I want to give a nod to your website, which is NuvioMobility.com. Just a really well done vignette as you open up the website that this is not a product demo website. This is a person who happens to be using this in real life demo on your website. So I think well done there. But what are some of the things that maybe someone looking at this video that's just looping isn't seeing in terms of the benefit of the product that you thought of and then put into that design?
Yeah, sure. So this was, you described a seesaw, which is so accurate. Seesaw on pricing, but also seesaw on the process of kind of getting to that price is what you pay, value is what you get,
Yep.
endpoint, right?
Yep.
And for us, I learned as much after we started developing products in terms of the functional benefits that there were opportunities to improve on with the product development firm, because they bring a lens that's an engineering lens and that's a very neutral lens. And they just go do almost third-party market research. And in some ways that would tie. And in other ways, I would maybe something that I was not diluting the value of, but wasn't thinking was a big deal, they were hearing a ton of and they were coming back. And then what we tried to do was we tried to really take, like I taught them the CMS mobility measure.
Yeah.
Like I taught them how we grade functional status on the clinical side. And then I was like, see what you can do with this. And we landed on 3 core, we call advanced benefits. One is the stand assist feature, which is a lower set of handrails and also a very stable base that comes from the re-engineering of it. Rollators and walkers, it's not so simple to just add a lower handrail and then for it to be useful for the patient. So we had to create space in the center. The other is the user standing in the center, you have about half the footprint, which is really valuable to the tight spaces of a home or hospital. We were hearing that a lot. I just can't get this clunky thing that when you stand behind a rollator, it's, it makes you, it's like a shopping cart. And I'm all sorts of, how do I turn around in my narrow apartment hallway sort of thing. But then when I approach a countertop or a cabinet or a door, all these sorts of reaching tasks, I am 1.5 feet away. And I am someone with low balance who should be reaching outside of that base support less than someone without a walker level need, right? And so getting you centered, we were able to gain huge benefits there, which was easier said than done, especially on a product level, like a sort of cost at the end game level. Those are our 3 mobility benefits. The 4th that is kind of on the side that you definitely probably wouldn't notice off of the video is, and this one surprised me a lot, was walkers and rollators, when they're folded and they're collapsed, they either don't stand and you have to lean them on something, or if they stand, they're not very maneuverable. And that becomes a caregiver thing, where even if you're going to collapse it for your loved one and then bring it around the car, or you're a PT in one of those parts of the video up at the top there, you see a physical therapist kind of, just bringing it over to his patient in a really smooth way. We were hearing that. We were like, this would be really nice if I didn't feel like I needed to pick it up to bring it to my patient, or pick it up to bring it around the side of the car or wherever I'm bringing it, or I didn't feel like I need to lean it. And so we made a design when it folds, it stands really nicely, really easily. But then it has a 360 0-degree turning radius. So then it's just very free maneuvering for whoever. But that's more for the caregiver. And that was a curveball for me. That was not something I was thinking of. That was what like the developers, they went and did their research and they came back. And they were like, "We're hearing a lot about this, dude. Do you have it?" And I was like, "That makes sense." So that was an interesting one.
I wanted to pause there. And this is
Oh,
some
there we go.
things that I heard there and that don't always get enough sunlight, which is we often minimize the things that we're good at or we know and overinflate the things that other people are good at or they know that we don't. For example, if you told me I had to write some sort of legal document, I would say, absolutely not. I should be nowhere near that. That's a lawyer, right? That's in their domain. That's here. But the things that a PT knows, well, that's simple. Everybody that I know knows that because I'm surrounded by PTs and understand that it's not one is more valuable than the other. It's where does that, where can you bring that information when it's most needed? But we're so comfortable with it. Like it's like an old pair of jeans for us that we just, it's not that valuable. I mean, it's been around forever. So that was really cool that you sort of highlighted that when the designers brought it back, they were able to see things that you hadn't even spotted because you've been looking, maybe from one lens or one direction, and it actually had way more value. That when you ask the end user, a caregiver, hey, if this thing could do that, gosh, I would pay a lot more because if it's this much easier to use times 10,000 uses, gosh, then you get that great GIF, right? Take my money. Like where do I sign up for this thing? And that's when you've really got a good balance or maybe that seesaw leaning in your favor of value over price. I loved how you said that. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. The other thing I like to hammer on people with is you determine the cost as a company or a PT. That's the cost. This is how much my time costs. This is what my product costs. The audience determines the value. They will either say, "Oh, that's not worth it," or "Oh my gosh, that's so much. I have to have that." Keep that in mind, right? So that concept is terribly valuable. Is you determine the cost. Everybody else determines the value. So let's talk about impact, right? How has this thing begun to impact people? I mean, this started with people. It might have started with a walker, but it couldn't have. It had to start with the people in and around that were going to use that walker or the caregivers who were going to be transporting that. What is some of the impact that you've started to see and hear and feel, and how has it been received from other PTs? I'm kind of curious about that too.
Yeah. So on the end user side versus kind of the PT side, on the end user side, it's been really exciting.
Good.
And I think what I've found interesting is like we like to think we sort of created a better tool that is going to be different for a lot of people, right? You may not really need the benefit of the sit to stand, sort of feature side of it,
right?
But you might feel like you want to buy it just because it is so much easier for you to do your daily tasks when you are 4 times closer to your countertop. I've developed a phrase, what might be marginal for you and I is not marginal for people who have a functional limitation. And that has been learned, right, from end users. And I think we did a really good job trying to stick to that, trying not to, and I think it's really easy, maybe, and it's maybe the reason that devices, our competitors, really most of the stuff you'd find on Amazon is rooted in 1970s engineering. It just, there's been upgrades and there just hasn't been much of a change. And I do think there's a marginalization of the value of those changes or the potential value of those changes because maybe you're framing it from an able-bodied perspective and you're framing it not from I've never really just like had every moment of my day impacted by a disability sort of thing. And it's been really validating for me personally to have that kind of feedback where these things that we maybe could have hedged on and just said, right, along the way, but we took the hard road. People are saying, I would buy it just for this. Maybe I don't need the stand assist, but my God, you're just making my day so much easier in the other ways. Or on the other side of it, I'd buy it just for the stand assist. I don't really need these other things, but oh my God, this is my pain point. One of the things we did during prototype testing that I think was a little different was I tried to sort of be an unbiased PT. And what we did was we measured them functionally. Like we we're totally hands off. Like, let me see what you do with your walker that you're using right now. It was all walker users. And then I'm going to give you this, and let me see what you do with this. But it wasn't just like it was very objective. It wasn't sort of the subjective, how can you move and everything like that. It was both. But we took them through the mobility measures. And one of the things I've learned more, I think, as a PT in this process is how impactful small changes on the mobility measure are on a data-driven scale to someone's recovery process, right? To someone's functional ability throughout their day, right? It's almost like the micro that feeds the macro. And so when you're gaining 13 percentage points in your CMS mobility measure in just one session, right? Just kind of switching out your tool that helps you move, you're going to hear from the end user, I have less pain, I'm walking twice as far. You're going to hear all the great subjective stuff from the sort of patient, but then you're able to look at that and say, oh shit, 13 percentage points on a mobility measure, that typically takes a couple weeks of rehab hospitalization. Like, they didn't need to stay that extra couple weeks, maybe, right, in a certain case. And that's been incredibly validating, because I do think I wanted to help clinicians as much as I wanted to help patients at the end of the day, because there's so much overlap when it comes to assistive needs. There's so many stakeholders. That was part of what I felt like was such a big opportunity, is people with functional limitations often have a big network effect you can support in a feedback loop kind of way. And then on the PT side, we're very excited to soon announce that we just partnered with a really large rehab supplier as we launch. And we did a lot of validation into rehab hospitals and clinics with them, with their sales reps over the summer, and the feedback was phenomenal. And I can't name them quite yet, but we're super pumped about that. And so we've kind of gotten really good streams of validation from both patient side, end user side, and from the PT side.
It sounds like you took this great line from the disability community, which is nothing about us without us. There's so many stories of products that if they just had 1% of the market, they'd be billionaires, and they focused on that, except they never asked the person who'd be using this on a daily basis, does this solve a problem? Yes or no? Or is the thing we think is a problem for you? And we heard that with, I had a chance to sit in on an interview with Judy Heumann, who is a great disability rights activist. And a lot of times she would say products would seek to solve a problem that didn't actually exist because nobody asked us. So it sounds like you took that to heart. Now let's focus on other PTs who might be sitting there nodding along, and they're half hour in and they're saying, hey, yeah, this is something I want to do. And I'm sure you get people reaching out to you about this. What advice would you give to other PTs or people listening who have an idea for a product, but aren't sure exactly where on that map you laid out for us to start? What lessons have you learned that could help them on their journey? How do you usually, what do you usually say to people like that?
I usually do try to lead with the honest take of, it's going to be more than whatever you think it's going to be. Do not think that you're going to shortcut it and you're going to, whatever product you have is going to be the one that is really easy or takes no money or just kind of gets to the market. And if you build it, they will come kind of thing. I usually tell them it's a big undertaking, and it will be larger than whatever you think it could be. But network. Talk to people. I think you put it well. Fill in the gaps. If you're really interested in it, just start by filling in the next gap and the next gap. It literally is the meme of the train tracks, laying down a train track as the train is rolling along, just laying it down, a few feet at a time, and just start with that next step and see if it leads you to the next one and the next one. And for some, it might be the engineering side. For others, it might be, is this truly a problem, right? Should I maybe talk to people and find out if I'm solving a problem that really exists? That's kind of where I would lean towards. And that will kind of guide you towards the path, right? It will if you do that, you will learn from that the next thing that you should focus on, and then you'll learn the next thing. Early on, a lot of what I was doing was educating myself. It really was. I would have a conversation with somebody knowledgeable about regulatory, and then I would teach myself a bunch about regulatory. I would just sort of dig in the weeds about something, and then the next few weeks would be something else, and that worked for me.
That's great. Find out more at nuviomobility.com. And I love the mission, empowering patients and users to move their best in their daily lives while supporting data-driven, connected care. Last thing we do on the show, Matt, we call it the parting shot. An opportunity for you to either repeat something or an idea or concept you've already said, or just what would you want to leave with the audience as we wrap up this episode?
I think one thing I like to remind people of is what I mentioned at some point about what's marginal for our patients, or what's marginal maybe for us is not marginal for our patients. I have been struck, I think, being able to sort of like take a lens and a step back and do the product development kind of thing and not be directly in with patients, realizing one of the biggest similarities across all patients I've had who've had like an assisted need, whether they're like the 20-year-old after a multi-trauma who just suddenly really devastatingly needs a walker or something more, or they're the 95-year-old, frail, maybe more what we typically think of, is they're all really surprised by what it means to now need a walker. They're totally taken aback because none of us ever think of it for ourselves, right? Like whenever we think about walkers, we think about our parents, our grandparents. We do the arm's length thing. I think I would make that my takeaway just because it's been like a huge lesson even for me. I think I got into this because I wasn't doing the arm's length thing, but I've kind of, I don't know, maybe wrapped my arms around that even more since I've been in it, because I think it's all too easy to think about it that way, even as PTs who are often closer to it than others.
Matt Cumella for Nuvio. Appreciate you doing this and sharing the journey so far. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. This was great.